The bulldozers were already at the edge of his property. Harold Wilson sat on the porch steps of the only home he'd ever known. 4 generations of his family had lived here. Now, Vertex Development wanted it gone. They gave him until sunset to leave. His arthritis-worn hands trembled as he clutched the eviction notice. Harold had nowhere to go. As the sun began to set, a sleek black car pulled into his gravel driveway. The door opened, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out. Hi everyone, welcome to Mystic Tales. Today, I'm excited to share a new story with you. Harold Wilson's family had built this house in 1932. His grandfather had laid every brick with his own hands. The oak tree in the front yard was planted the day Harold was born. Every corner held memories that money couldn't buy. This house survived the Great Depression and 2 world wars, Harold told his neighbor Martha. My father taught me to ride a bicycle in that driveway. My wife and I raised our children here. Martha nodded sadly. She had already sold her place to Vertex Development. Most of the neighborhood had done the same over the past year. They're offering good money, Harold, she said gently. Maybe it's time. But Harold couldn't put a price on his memories. The back porch where his late wife Susan used to grow tomatoes. The living room where they had danced on their 50th anniversary. The kitchen table where his grandchildren still gathered for Sunday dinners. Harold had tried fighting back through proper channels. He attended every town council meeting. He consulted with a local attorney who reviewed his case for free. The zoning laws have been changed, the lawyer explained. They've got the permits, and they've bought all the surrounding properties. I'm sorry, but legally there's not much we can do. Harold's pension barely covered his property taxes and medication. His savings were modest. Vertex had initially offered a fair price, but Harold refused. Then the tactics changed. The water to his neighborhood was shut off for repairs that lasted days. Construction vehicles blocked his driveway. Strange men took photos of his property at all hours. Yesterday, a young man in an expensive suit had knocked on his door. Mr. Wilson, I'm Ryan Porter from Vertex Development, he said. I'll be direct. This is our final offer, 20% less than our original proposal. You have until tomorrow evening to accept. Harold's hands shook as he closed the door. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in his rocking chair, looking at old family photos. By morning, he had made peace with the inevitable. He started packing his most precious belongings into cardboard boxes. The eviction notice came at noon. The sheriff looked uncomfortable delivering it. I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson, they've got a court order. You have until 7 p.m. today. By mid-afternoon, Harold had filled 6 boxes with photographs, his wife's china, and family heirlooms. His arthritic knees ached from the effort. He sat on the porch to rest, watching the bulldozers idle at the edge of his property. A young woman pulled over on the street. Her car had steam rising from under the hood. Harold watched as she popped the hood and stared helplessly at the engine. Despite everything, he couldn't ignore someone in trouble. He walked slowly down his driveway. Car trouble. The woman looked up, wiping sweat from her forehead. Radiators overheating, I think. I was on my way to a job interview. Harold nodded. Let me get you some water for it, and you look like you could use a glass yourself. I don't want to bother you, she said, noticing the boxes on his porch. No bother at all, Harold replied. I've got time. He brought water for both the radiator and the woman. Then he found his old toolbox and helped her secure a loose hose connection. My name's Harold, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. I'm Claire, she replied. Thank you so much. Are you moving? Harold's eyes drifted to the bulldozers. Not by choice. Big corporation bought the neighborhood. I'm the last one left. Claire frowned. That's terrible. Don't you have anywhere to go? My daughter lives 2 states away. I suppose I'll stay with her until I figure something out. Claire checked her watch. I'm going to be late for my interview. Is there anything I can do to help you? Harold shook his head. Just an old man losing his home. Nothing new in this world. Which company is doing this? She asked. Vertex Development. They're building some kind of shopping complex. Claire took a business card from her purse and wrote something on the back. "My cell number. If you need anything, please call." Harold tucked the card in his pocket, not wanting to be rude. He'd probably never call, but he appreciated the gesture. After Claire drove away, Harold returned to packing. The sheriff's car pulled up around 5 o'clock. 2 Vertex representatives arrived shortly after. They stood near their luxury SUV, checking watches and making phone calls. Harold sat in his rocking chair on the porch, taking in the sunset one last time. The sky turned brilliant orange, then deep purple. He wasn't ready to leave, but time had run out. As darkness fell, Ryan Porter from Vertex approached the porch. "Mr. Wilson, it's time. Do you need help with your boxes?" Harold stood slowly. "I can manage." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Sir, I can give you a ride to a motel for tonight." Harold was about to answer when headlights turned into his driveway. A black luxury sedan pulled up behind the sheriff's car. The engine shut off, and the driver's door opened. A tall man in his 50s stepped out. He wore a tailored suit that even Harold could tell was expensive. The man approached with confident strides. "Mr. Wilson?" he asked, extending his hand. "My name is Michael Donovan." Ryan Porter's face drained of color. "Mr. Donovan? What are you doing here?" Donovan ignored him, focusing on Harold. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. May I speak with you for a moment?" Harold nodded, confused. "I don't have much time left here, as you can see." "That's precisely what I want to discuss," Donovan said. He turned to the sheriff. "Could we have a few minutes?" The sheriff checked his watch. "The eviction order." 15 minutes, Donovan said firmly. The sheriff nodded and stepped away. Ryan Porter tried to interject, but Donovan silenced him with a raised hand. "Wait by your car," Donovan told him. Once they were alone on the porch, Harold gestured to his rocking chair. "Would you like to sit?" "Thank you," Donovan said, taking the offered seat while Harold sat on the porch swing. "I met someone interesting today," Donovan began. "A young woman named Claire interviewed at my office this afternoon. She was late because her car overheated. She told me about the kind elderly gentleman who helped her." Harold remembered the woman from earlier. "That was nothing special." "She thought it was," Donovan continued. "Especially when she learned you were being evicted the same day you helped her. She recognized my company name when you mentioned Vertex." Harold's eyes widened. "You work for Vertex?" "I own Vertex Development," Donovan said quietly, "among other companies." Harold stiffened. "Come to watch the eviction yourself?" "No," Donovan said. "I came because I knew nothing about this project until today. My acquisitions team handles dozens of developments. I delegate most decisions, but when Claire told me about you, I looked into this project personally." Harold studied the man's face, trying to understand. "And?" "I discovered that my team has been using aggressive tactics I don't approve of," Donovan said, "particularly with holdouts like yourself." "So what happens now?" Harold asked. "The bulldozers are still waiting." Donovan leaned forward in the rocking chair. "That depends on you, Mr. Wilson. I've reviewed the development plans. The shopping complex design could be modified to preserve your property." Harold looked skeptical. "Why would you do that? Must be losing millions." "Not millions," Donovan said. "The project would still be profitable. We'd need to redesign some elements, but it's feasible." Harold shook his head. "I don't understand. Yesterday your company was threatening me. Today the owner shows up offering to change everything." "I built my business from nothing," Donovan explained. "My father worked construction his whole life. We lost our home during the recession of '82. I never forgot that feeling." He stood and walked to the porch railing, looking out at the property. "Claire told me how you stopped to help her when you were facing eviction. That says something about your character." Harold joined him at the railing. "This house means everything to me." "I understand that now," Donovan said. "I've made a decision. If you want to stay, the eviction will be canceled immediately." Harold's voice wavered. "Just like that?" "There would be some conditions," Donovan clarified. "Construction will continue around your property. It will be noisy for months. Your neighbors are gone. The neighborhood won't be the same. Harold nodded slowly. I know that. But this is still my home. Then it remains yours, Donovan said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a document. This is a legal agreement. It guarantees your right to remain here for the rest of your life. The property will never be seized through eminent domain or other means. Harold took the paper with trembling hands. I should have a lawyer look at this. Absolutely, Donovan agreed. Take your time. The eviction is suspended pending your decision. He turned and motioned to Ryan Porter, who hurried over from the SUV. Mr. Porter, the Wilson property is now excluded from the development. Call the construction team and tell them to stand down. Then contact our architects about redesigning the south entrance. Porter's mouth fell open. Sir, we've already invested in the current plans. The board won't approve. I'm not asking for approval, Donovan interrupted. I'm telling you how this will proceed. If you have concerns about executing these changes, I can find someone who won't. Porter swallowed hard. Yes, sir, I'll make the calls right away. The sheriff approached cautiously. Does this mean the eviction is off? Yes, Donovan confirmed. Mr. Wilson is staying. My legal team will file the appropriate paperwork tomorrow. Harold stood in stunned silence, the agreement still in his hand. After months of fighting and a day of packing, he could hardly believe the sudden reversal. 6 months later, Harold sat on his front porch drinking lemonade. The construction around his property was nearly complete. True to Donovan's word, the shopping complex had been redesigned to accommodate his home. A small park now bordered his property, creating a buffer between his house and the commercial buildings. Martha, his former neighbor, pulled into his driveway for a visit. She walked up the newly repaired steps that Donovan's company had fixed as a goodwill gesture. The place looks good, Harold, she said, accepting a glass of lemonade. They did right by me in the end, Harold acknowledged. The local newspaper had covered the story, not as a dramatic showdown, but as a business decision that balanced progress with respect for history. Donovan had given a brief statement about corporate responsibility to the communities they develop. Have you seen the complex? Martha asked. They're opening next month. Harold nodded. Mr. Donovan gave me a tour last week. They named the central courtyard Wilson Square. Has a little plaque explaining the history of the neighborhood. The relationship between Harold and Donovan had evolved into a respectful acquaintance. They weren't friends exactly, but Donovan checked in occasionally to ensure the construction wasn't causing problems. And how's Claire doing? Martha asked with a knowing smile. Claire had been hired at Donovan's company. She visited Harold regularly, sometimes bringing her children to hear his stories about the old neighborhood. She's doing well. Got promoted last month, Harold said proudly. She brings me groceries on Tuesdays, says it's repayment for fixing her car, but I think she just likes the company. Harold's daughter had visited after hearing about the development situation. She'd offered again to have him move closer to her family. I told her maybe in a few years, Harold explained to Martha, not ready to leave just yet. The sound of construction had become familiar background noise. Harold had made peace with the changes around him. His home remained his sanctuary. That evening, as Harold watered Susan's old rose bushes, Donovan's car pulled up. He got out holding a small package. Evening, Mr. Wilson. Thought you might want to see this before the ceremony. He handed Harold the package. Inside was a framed photo of Harold's house from the 1940s, alongside an artist's rendering of the completed development with his home preserved at its heart. We'll be hanging this in the management office, Donovan explained. A reminder that progress doesn't have to erase history. Harold studied the images. Never thought I'd be part of the future of this place. Sometimes the most valuable things aren't on any balance sheet, Donovan replied. My board members eventually understood that. As the sun set, Harold realized something important. His stand hadn't just saved his home, it had reminded a powerful man of values he'd nearly forgotten. Sometimes, standing your ground could change more than just your own circumstances. Loved this story? Tap that like button and subscribe to Mystic Tales for more. Let us know how this story made you feel with a single word in the comments.